promptly.
One, for the record, can you state your name?
My name is Sean C. Harrison.
Okay, Mr. Harrison, can you tell us a little bit more about the condition that you have?
Yes, I was actually diagnosed at age 19 with paranoid schizophrenia, which is the most severe form of mental illness ever documented, as well as the most common. So, paranoid schizophrenia is a condition that affects our cognitive processes very adversely. So, you will find that a number of symptoms are produced that are very troubling. um, our perceptions of the world are usually very different, and the stimuli around us are markedly tangential to anything that you would describe or deem normal. So uh, there are conditions that prevail, such as paranoia, delusions, morbid fear, and often when you experience these things, your world seems a very dark place, as I had gone to in my own experiences on a number of occasions.
Okay. All right. So you say you have been going through this since you were 19.
Yes,
How
sir.
old are you now?
I'm now 47 years old. Today is my birthday,
So you've been
actually.
going through this for about 26 years.
Yes, 26 years.
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you, sir.
So also, you mentioned that there's a lot of fear that comes about as a result of this condition.
Yes.
I'm assuming that this has affected job prospects for you, has it?
Well, the truth about it is that you will find that the illness actually does impair your ability to function normally. So, for me, for example, having been in the office setting, having worked with the Southeast Regional Health Authority, St. Thomas Health Department for 10 years, I would have problems actually focusing on my job, you know, as a result of the fact that around me, there would be people talking, people laughing, they would be crying, in the health center of children, and crying of children in the nearby children's ward at the hospital. And so, especially when I would find myself in an acute phase, all of these stimuli would just seem to be rushing into my brain. And I am struggling very, very greatly to maintain my focus on what I'm doing. So you will find that persons like me who, might not function as highly as I do, they don't keep their jobs for very long, because it's not long usually until employees and employers alike realize that even if the mental health status is not disclosed, it's not long until they realize that something might be very different about this person. And often that can be very intimidating when it is revealed that he or she suffers from a mental illness.
Is that what happened to you? Everything was fine until you disclosed your mental condition?
Well, from the get go, my situation was such that having worked at the St. Thomas Health Department, the very same compound on which the Princess Margaret Hospital is found, as well as the Morant Bay Health Center, you would have found that I, in years gone by, would have been treated there. So certain employees would have known of my status, and all of management would have been aware of my mental health status. So the truth is that I would have suffered discrimination and different types of persecution in truth, simply because my mental health status was more or less known, maybe not as widely, but known by a number of key persons who could have used it against me. Yes, that's a reality that we have to live.
Okay. So the next question I have is, having gone through this at work, the discrimination, persecution you speak of, did it cause you to do anything rash, anything serious?
Well, the truth is that having remained stable through the years for most of my experience of paranoid schizophrenia, especially even to while I was working for that one sealed decade with the St. Thomas Health Department, I struggled, but I was more or less deemed very stable and highly functional. So it would not have necessarily posed a problem as it concerns, as it concerned my execution of, the job at hand, because I was told by management as well as other staff that I was working extremely well, and so they did not have a problem. I mean, I actually worked in the capacity of cashier at the Morby Health Center, and my money was never, you know, in a state, you know, that you could have said would have raised alarm or concern. I was always, balancing. I was always producing work of a high quality. Even in this second 5 years, where I moved to the St. Thomas Health Department, where I, executed data entry responsibilities. I did so very well, and so much so that when they lost me, um, they would have expressed a little bit too late that um, they did not realize I was such a good worker until I had left. And truth is that that would have also produced um, that experience would have also produced for me quite an aversion. After having gone through everything, quite an aversion to the actual 9 to 5 setting because the treatment was not very wonderful. Persons were not key persons who could have helped were not very supportive. Nonetheless, I did find a core of persons that I could speak with, confide in, a very small fraction of the staff complement there. And so as a result of that, it made my stay there even a bit more bearable.
Okay. Tell us about your worst case scenario going through the schizophrenia.
Well, I can clearly remember the period of 2013 to 2018 when I fell gravely ill as a result of a number of very, very extreme and telling stresses, as a result of those stresses, non-compliance with my medication regimen. And so this would have seen me acting quite a bit out of character, and the spectacle in the St. Thomas community was actually something that was very disturbing to a number of persons. So you would have found, not having been taking my medication, not having been taking my shot, I would have been at a number of junctures walking the length and breadth of the parish of St. Thomas naked and walking long distances too. I remember that on about maybe 5 occasions actually walking from St. Thomas to Kingston, which would be an over 32-mile trip, and maybe up to 2 times walking to Kingston and from Kingston in one 24-hour period. I was in such mental anguish and such straits, based on the situation that prevailed in my family, as well as my recent uh, stepping down from my post at the St. Thomas Health Department, that I fell into a state of, very serious mental breakdown. So I would have been verbally aggressive, and I would have been walking dirty for days, probably not having had a shower. And so, the major thing was that most of my well established relationships, good relationships with many persons, was adversely affected because my mind was not processing information and stimuli in a normal way. So it definitely affected my interactions too. And so, yes, that is in a nutshell, what I can say is the most telling uh, thing
Mhm.
or period that I would have gone through between 2013 and 2018.
And how do you cope now?
Well, my situation previously was such that I had a better arrangement as it concerned my life situation. When I was working for the 10 years, of course, I had a steady income, small though it was. But my mother, who is now deceased, Mrs. Patricia Harrison, would have, especially having been abroad, been sending financial aid to me as well as other relatives in a lesser capacity. But my needs were met. I had the basics and more than the basics: food, clothes, and shelter. And so then it would have been a more suitable situation. Now it's a bit different because I'm basically winging it on my own. But I can tell you that the maintenance of good and healthy interactions and relationships is one of the very key things to actually having a positive outcome or positive outcomes as it relates to mental illness. Also, I have to tell you that maybe most importantly, or very importantly, mental illness being a long established experience for many persons usually requires for its management uh, uh, a medication regimen that is suitable and that is workable enough for the person to remain stable. So the truth is that that is a very big part of my survival now, being compliant with medications.
Okay.
Because what we must realize, and what I would have learned, was that mental illness most often persists as a result of number one, a number of underlying traumas or a particular underlying trauma that would make life a lot less bearable. And so we find that often persons having tried many things, as I did, the deliverance ministers, herbal products, and other things, you would find that oftentimes it's mostly the medications that you remain on
Okay.
that determine in large part
Mhm.
how stable you remain, and in the short term
Mhm.
as well as in the long term.
So in essence, the medication helps, and the interactions with persons also help. So both things are key things in how you cope currently with medication.
Yes, indeed, and
Okay.
I
Right.
must say it's usually very advisable for the sufferer to find himself in a community of persons, a group of persons with like interests, such as the church
Okay.
or a mosque, some form of religious or persuasion or some form of
Mhm.
faith-based situation, as well as maybe social clubs and other areas of living and interacting where you can find
Community to
common ground. You can
understand.
find a group of persons who will be there to support you, even in times of crisis, be there to actually, reel you back in
Okay.
from possible disaster.
Understood.
Yes.
All right. The final question that I have for you, or one of the final questions I have, is: do you remember what life was like before being diagnosed?
Yes, I certainly do. Even though my childhood into adolescence, into adulthood, young adulthood was, mostly normal. Uh, I do remember, though, that pre-schizophrenia thought processes were a lot easier to cope with. So you found also that your relationships would not have suffered. Your interactions with persons would not have suffered. You wouldn't have, been experiencing as much schism as it concerns moving in relationships and in interactions with persons.
Mm-hmm.
Life pre schizophrenia was pretty much um, happy and positive in a number of respects, or as happy and positive as I determined to make it. So you,
And life
yes,
after
and
schizophrenia.
life after schizophrenia involved a lot of mental duress,
Okay.
mental pressure. So you found that, I would have had periods of depression, had periods of, just terrible disorientation that, as I explained before, would be markedly different from when I was actually stable. And even while stable, the phenomenon of residual symptoms actually affected me. So even though I was compliant on medication, I was still experiencing some level of paranoia, some level of um, hallucinations, as well as delusions.
Mm-hmm.
But the medication actually kept it mostly at bay.
Okay.
But I can tell you that it's markedly different pre-schizophrenia and
Yeah.
post schizophrenia.
You are quite an articulate man. Based on the number of situations that you have been through from 19 to now, I am of the assumption that education may not have been the easiest thing to acquire.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So, what would have led to how fluent you speak?
Well, as a child, I have to give um, my parents, Mrs. Patricia Harrison and Mr. Lascelles Harrison.
Is he still alive?
No, my father is alive, but he's actually living um, totally blind now
Okay.
in his early 80s.
Okay.
And my mother is deceased. She
Mm-hmm.
died in 2015 from
Okay.
cancer.
Okay.
So the truth is that those two persons were instrumental in providing the the the
Environment.
background and
Okay.
environment of learning for us. My mother, you see, was a school teacher, and she made sure that we had all our books. She made sure we had everything we needed for school, even in the church community that I was ensconced in from infancy until late in life when I actually made a move from the Adventist church. You would have found that my mother, especially, would have been seeking to involve me not only in the church setting but also in the wider community, because I had a wonderful gift to sing,
Okay.
and so my mother would have involved me in a number of activities that would have,
Brought about the same capabilities.
brought about, the foundation that I needed in order to excel in school, and I did very well in school throughout. So the truth is that having applied myself to my studies by and large, and having been exposed especially to music, my father, Lascelles, Churchill, or Bambina Harrison, he was an avid listener of classical music. And so there would also be other forms of music um, played in my home, and I would just assimilate all of the musical intelligence to actually later on be able to write many songs. I've written over 400 songs, and also to have been able to sing and to have in my musical memory a vast cache, a storehouse of music,
Okay.
yes,
So music and family upbringing were
yes,
vital
yes,
in how
indeed,
fluent you are.
yes, indeed.
Based on how you speak, you sound like someone who had quite a lovely upbringing. Question.
Yes, go ahead.
I actually want you to continue. So why did you make that facial expression?
Because the truth is that the most I can say is that growing up was bittersweet. Very happy moments. It was not devoid of very happy moments. But then, there were other things that actually came along as it concerned even family life, where there was marital tension. My brothers also were not the most functional of persons.
Meaning what?
Meaning, meaning, teenage trouble.
Okay.
So the truth is that I, having been the youngest sibling and the youngest member of the family, in truth would have experienced a number of things. As I said, marital tension, seeing things and hearing things, squabbles, and other familial, trouble that would have actually impacted me even more than I would have recognized or admitted for a number of years. And so also, a critical inner struggle that I had that was shared with no one else for a number of years weighed heavily on me. So,
Do you mind
true,
sharing that?
do I mind sharing that? I would not necessarily want to get into that particular, bout of adversity, which I still struggle with today, but I have learned to cope.
At its core, can you say that the adversity that you are still healing from or coping with is one of the main reasons for the onset of your condition, or it was predominantly marital tension coupled with the tension between your siblings? Was it that, or was it a
Well,
mixture of
I
everything I
must
mentioned?
tell you too, in addition, there is also a family history of mental illness.
Got you.
On one side of the family, in a more pronounced way, on the paternal side. So
Understand.
that factored in very greatly. But also, there was trauma. One of the kinds of trauma that I actually endured was the loss of my dear brother Dexter Orlando Harrison at age 14. When I was 14 years old, he was actually buried on my birthday. He was 23 years old when he was shot and killed, and he was actually a very good brother to me, and I would have taken many years to have even come to a measurably um, satisfactory place of healing after his death and as a result of his loss. So all of those things, trauma in other ways too. As I said, we were basically happy children in the home, and we had very good moments, But then, as I said, the constant ridicule because I was, pretty much a soft child, in a sense, pretty much effeminate. And you know that in Jamaica, people will suffer terrible ridicule as well as persecution as a result of being different in that sense, not being the typical boy or the typical, so the truth about it is that a number of factors would have been at play, including the nature nurture um, scenario where the environment in the home, as it concerns parental roles and parental responsibilities, would have also been at play in my situation. So I would call myself a classic case scenario. Almost every criterion, that could have been established for the onset of paranoid schizophrenia, I would have experienced.
Finally, what's your message to Jamaicans? What do you want Jamaicans to know about your condition and about how they treat people similar to you? And what's one advice you have? In essence, what's your advice to Jamaicans?
My advice to Jamaicans is this: uh, let us remind ourselves that a disability is not the preserve of only a particular demographic, as well as zeroing in on mental illness. We must realize that a mental illness can actually take root in anyone's life given certain prevailing factors that would be working against that person or those persons. And so, truly, when the shoe is on the other foot, that is when oftentimes we realize what the experiences would have been of other persons who might have been suffering along that vein. So, establishing that, I would love for Jamaicans to come to a place where we see each mentally ill person as a human being, as deserving of love, deserving of patience, deserving of forbearance, deserving of mercy, because oftentimes the mentally ill do many things that are particularly egregious and troubling in the throes, while they are in the throes of their condition. And I have been no different. Being a member of the St. Thomas community, having so called fallen from grace, I would have experienced physical abuse. I would have experienced verbal abuse. I would have experienced the disruption of once healthy relationships, once healthy friendships would have actually dissipated. And so the truth is that it can make mental illness, the experience of it for the sufferer as well as those who are looking on, family members, well wishers, friends. It can make mental illness a very difficult journey for both caregivers and sufferers. But I would encourage anyone having seen my story, having known my experience of having gone to deep, deep adversity, I would, having bounced back now to be better than I was before. At any time, the cards that are played, or that are dealt as a result, can actually turn in a mentally ill person's favor, and that person actually becomes a tower of strength and a source of inspiration, as I have been, to the world. If you go on the internet and you see my on-net presence, there have been television and radio interviews, there have been newspaper stories and articles. I have published 9 uh, books on the Amazon platform. I have 2 basically full length, well, one full length and an EP uh, album. Yes, and as well as social media postings. So just to say the long and short, that what a person might be today is not necessarily reflective of what he was yesterday. And that is what we all need to be mindful of. That at any time we can take the high road and we can become um, our better selves, in the blink of an eye. So let us all embrace the mentally ill and the mentally challenged and provide for them and for us an environment in which we can flourish and become the persons that we need to be, the better versions of ourselves.